Australia and the Amazon are burning, the Arctic is melting, extreme flooding, freakish storms. Earth just endured its second hottest year on record, and we've wiped out a majority of global wildlife since 1970. But President Trump keeps gutting America's climate policies. Let's talk through the biggest changes underway. Trump left the Paris Climate Accord in 2017, and it just went downhill from there. He's allowed more pollution from cars and trucks, opened more lands to drilling, and even downgraded the Clean Power Plan. Trump revoked a rule preventing coal companies from dumping mining debris into local streams, allowing toxic metals with dire health impacts into nearby water supplies. He weakened rules for reducing air pollution, which children and pregnant women are especially vulnerable to. He lifted a ban on drilling in protected areas, like the fragile ecosystem of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. He relaxed restrictions on methane and power plant emissions, some of the most significant drivers of climate change. And finally, he revoked a law aimed at cutting greenhouse gas emissions by the federal government, putting the U.S. far behind global carbon reduction targets. The world's leading scientists say we've only got 11 years left to change everything about how we live, eat, produce, and waste if we want a shot at a livable future. The U.S. has caused more global warming than any other country, but we're not doing much to stop it. Racial segregation in the U.S. is not in our past. It's our present. There's a crazy wealth gap between white and black Americans that's tied to home ownership. White Americans hold 7 times the wealth of black Americans, the same ratio as in the civil rights era. And even though black people make up nearly 13% of the U.S. population, they hold less than 3% of the nation's wealth. Now you have to understand that owning property is the major way American families build wealth. But when state-mandated discrimination stops black people from owning their homes, the growth of their wealth gets halted too. Okay, you have to go way back to see how this happened. When the Great Depression hit, the federal government created public housing to help American families for the first time. They mostly made public housing projects for white people, but there were some made for black folks too. By the mid-1930s, the government was offering subsidized mortgages at a fraction of the price for white families, so they could move into brand new houses in the suburbs. Black people were specifically prohibited from these deals. They instead had to stay in public housing, often paying more for their rent than white families paid in mortgage. On top of that, the practice of redlining grew across the nation. The HOLC created city maps to indicate the level of risk for real estate investments. These maps ranked desirable neighborhoods for lending, such as white suburbs, in green, and marked undesirable or risky neighborhoods, often populated by black communities, in red. As a result, redlining destroyed the possibility of investment wherever black people live, ruining their chances at growing their wealth, property, or social mobility. Meanwhile, the government backed $120 billion in low-cost home loans between 1934 and 1962. More than 98% of these loans went to white homebuyers. By the time housing segregation was banned in the Fair Housing Act of 1968, it was too little, too late. The damage was already done for generations. The inequity of home ownership had launched a domino effect that made it far too difficult for black families to try and purchase homes in similar suburbs. These neighborhoods had quadrupled in value over time, leaving black Americans far behind. Today, 73% of white households are homeowners, while the percentage for black households is only 45%. Even worse, black people who reached homeownership sometimes faced violence as a result, at the hands of white Americans and police. Racially segregated neighborhoods have a grave impact on many realms of American life. Where you live can determine what kind of education is available for your children, how much wealth you can have, your relationship with law enforcement, and even your own family's health. The biggest takeaway from all of this? Racial segregation and the wealth gap in the U.S. is not just due to personal prejudice or private actions. Instead, it's a direct result of state-sanctioned policies intended to stop black Americans from achieving success that in many ways continues today.